Horror movies love snatching away victories. There's nothing more devastating than seeing a character that you've been rooting for thinking that they've managed to escape the killer only to then suddenly meet a brutal death. And that's exactly what we're talking about today. So, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com and these are horror movie characters who were seconds away from surviving. William Saw 6. By design, there are a lot of characters who are only seconds away from surviving in the Saw franchise. Of all the characters on this list, these are the only ones who have a literal timer counting down to their demise. None have come quite so close to victory, only to have it snatched away from them than William in Saw 6 though. This dodgy health insurance exec is forced into a series of tests where he decides who lives and who dies out of his colleagues, a process that causes him untold levels of trauma. Eventually, he gets through his task though, only to be treated by one final game in classic Saw fashion. However, this time around the tables are turned, and it's his fate that's being decided by Pamela and Brent, a grieving mother and son duo. The twist is, William previously denied Pamela's husband and Brent's father the health insurance that he needed to cure an ailment that eventually killed him, and Jigsaw has now given them the ability to enact revenge should they wish. For a moment though, it looks like mercy might prevail, that is, until Brent pulls the lever and sentences William to death via acid. Dewey scream. Oh Dewey, your 9 lives finally gave out, didn't they? Deputy Dewey should not have made it this far in the Scream series. I mean, the man has been attacked and left for dead so many times that it became a running joke. It's just a shame that the build-up to Dewey's death is so frustrating and obvious. After helping the new heroes escape from a ghost-face attack at a hospital, Dewey puts them in an elevator and then suddenly turns back. See, he'd shot the killer a few times, but this being his 5th time around, he knows that they always come back if you don't hit them in the head. Consequently, an injured Dewey goes alone to finish the job, only to, of course, get blindsided and killed in a twist that everyone saw coming as soon as he didn't bolt it with the rest. While Dewey attempting to finish the job is of course commendable, it's still a dumb thing to do in this specific moment. At the very least, he could have made sure that he had one of the survivors backing him up, but instead, he tempts fate despite barely getting away in the first place. Ben, Night of the Living Dead. A true classic of the genre, Ben's death in Night of the Living Dead was so surprising and impactful that we're still regularly talking about it over 50 years later. To sum up this ghoulish zombie tale, a group of human survivors band together to defend a house against the undead, with only one of them, Ben, being smart enough and strong enough to not become zombie chow overnight. Instead, he manages to secure himself in the cellar, awakening in the morning to the sounds of a hunting party clearing the zombies from the area. And in that moment, it looks like help has arrived, but of course, things are never that simple. Hearing the shots, Ben tentatively goes upstairs to investigate the commotion outside, only for the hunting party to spot him through the window and then shoot him in the head, mistaking him for one of the shamblers. It's an incredibly poignant ending that's aged like a fine wine, and it's partly so heartbreaking because had Ben just taken a few more seconds to investigate the noise, he might not have met a grisly end. Simon, Fear Street Part 1, 1994. Fear Street Part 1, 1994 meant business, and it confirmed this by killing 2 of the most likable characters, Kate and Simon, right at the end of the climax. These 2 were tasked with running distractions against these supernatural killers while main character Dina attempted to rid Sam of a curse that conjured these monsters in the first place. She eventually does succeed, albeit temporarily, but not before Kate's head is put through a bread slicer and Simon gets axed in the brain. While Kate had no real chance of getting out alive, Simon is off mere moments before the curse is broken and the killers disappear, making his demise all the more devastating. Though the actors continue to cross over in the rest of the series playing other characters, Simon himself is missed dearly. Leaving Cube. Cube sees 5 people trapped in a deadly maze, forced to move room to room avoiding traps in the hopes of eventually making it to the end. Among them is Joan Leven, a smart young woman with a whole lot of compassion. It's that compassion that ultimately leads to her downfall though. Just as the 3 remaining survivors, leaving Kazan and Worth, are about to escape the cube through the final door, Worth has a change of heart at the very last hurdle and decides that actually he wants to stay behind to die. Instead of taking her opportunity to escape and saying, well, your choice dude, Leven actually stops to talk some sense into him. This gives the psychotic and presumed dead Quentin the opportunity to catch up to the group and then impale Levin from behind, which will be something of a running theme on this list. When all is said and done, Quentin, Worth, and Levin all die, while only Kazan takes his chance to escape. Melody, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022. The most recent Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie is totally bonkers, but not really in a good way. It's chaotic, random, and seems to just pull things straight out of its arse. Case in point, the surprise death of Melody, who gets beheaded via chainsaw seconds before the movie ends. But let's back up for a second. See, this latest franchise offering once again sees a bevy of youngsters encroach on Killer Leatherface's turf, leaving only 2 survivors, sisters Melody and Lila. The pair then stage a final showdown with the chainsaw-wielding maniac and just about get the upper hand on him. Taking the saw for themselves, they use it to give the villain an uppercut which seemingly kills Leatherface as he gets knocked back and then sinks to the bottom of a pool. The pair escape, jump into a car and put it on auto drive, laughing to themselves about how the nightmare is now over. Of course, it isn't though, and Leatherface suddenly comes back to life, smashes through the car window and drags Melody out before taking off her head while taunting Lila as the car drives away. It's jarring, bizarre, and out of nowhere, but it certainly makes you consider just how close both were to getting out alive. Jenna, Friday the 13th, 2009. The Friday the 13th reboot isn't a great horror movie, but it did have a few shocks up its sleeve. This time around, the story isn't solely about horny young adults going to Camp Crystal Lake to have sex with each other and then get chopped up by Jason Voorhees, though there is still a lot of that. It's also about Claire, a man whose sister Whitney recently disappeared on the camp grounds. While the other characters party, Claire is joined by Jenna as the pair team up to find Whitney. And they eventually stumble upon her chained in the tunnels running underneath Camp Crystal Lake, but unfortunately for them, that just so happens to be the place that Jason calls home, and the 3 are then chased to the exit. After a scuffle, it looks like they're about to get free, with Whitney and Claire climbing out of the tunnels and reaching down for Jenna, who then gets impaled in a jump scare as Jason catches up to them. She was so close to getting out, but hey, I guess at least Claire made sure his sister got out first. Hallie, Scream 2. So, right at the very end of the movie, Sydney and her college pal Hallie are being escorted by 2 of the worst police officers in the world to apparent safety, until Ghostface turns up and dispatches the security detail embarrassingly easy despite them being in a car at the time. Ghostface then climbs in and starts living out his wildest GTA dreams before crashing and knocking himself clean out. What comes next is an incredibly tense scene where Sydney and Hallie have to climb over Ghostface to escape the car via the passenger seat window. Sydney makes it out and you expect Hallie to die while also trying to climb over him, but to the audience's surprise, she actually manages to slip out as well. The 2 take off down the street, only for Sid to then turn around and walk back to the car to unmask the killer. In doing so, she leaves poor Hallie alone in the middle of the street, who, surprise surprise, then gets killed by a now conscious Ghostface who slipped out the car when the pair had their backs turned. It's like, Sid, I know you really needed to know who was tormenting you, but you should just be grateful that nobody died in that car to begin with. Stop tempting fate.
Dr. Ardmore, Child's Play. Now, Child's Play opens with a murderer called Chucky transferring his soul into a doll to cheat death, as you do. A young widow named Karen comes into possession of the doll and gives it to her son Andy. Unable to control his murderous compulsion, Chucky kills again in this new body, starting with Karen's friend Maggie. Even though Andy tries to warn people that Chucky did it, nobody believes him and he's sent to a psychiatric hospital. While the doctors perform tests on Andy to gauge his mental stability, Chucky stabs the psychiatrist Dr. Ardmore with a scalpel. While he lies wounded on the ground, Chucky places an electroshock device on the doctor's head. The demonic doll then sets the machine to full power, frying Ardmore's skull until blood gushes out of his mouth and eyes. However, Ardmore could have avoided meeting his maker if he just pulled the device off of his head. It wasn't strapped on or anything, so he could have whipped it off in less than a second. Since he failed to act, Dr. Ardmore only has himself to blame for his demise. Tim, Final Destination 2. In the beginning of Final Destination 2, a teenager called Tim and several others narrowly escape being smushed in a horrific highway pileup. But because Tim was meant to die in this accident, Death feels cheated and so prepares to kill him and the rest of the survivors. When Tim is getting his teeth sorted at the dentist soon after, the Grim Reaper causes a squeaky toy to fall into his mouth, cutting off his breathing. Fortunately, an assistant notices that Tim is struggling for air and pulls the toy out. Now, after this experience, you think that Tim would be more careful, but the next scene proves that he's anything but. Immediately, Immediately after walking out of the dental office, Tim runs towards a flock of pigeons trying to kick them. As they fly away, one bird knocks into a construction worker, causing him to press a button that drops a window pane, and the pane falls straight onto Tim, crushing him to death. Now, if Tim had choked to death on the squeaky toy, it wouldn't have been his fault since he was paralyzed by the anesthetic. Sadly, that's not the case here, since the cause of Tim's death falls squarely on his own shoulders. The soldier at the beginning. Army of the Dead. Army of the Dead begins with several soldiers transporting a zombie in a sealed container from Area 51 to an undisclosed location. When the convoy crashes into a car, the container opens, allowing the zombie to break free. Even though it's easy enough to criticize characters in a movie for acting stupid in a life or death situation, most people wouldn't fare better in the same scenario. After all, it's not uncommon for a person to freeze up in fear when their life is in danger. However, this logic doesn't apply to military personnel. Navy SEALs and Black Ops agents have been trained to think logically and act swiftly under the direst of threats, and yet the soldier in this scene takes zero precautions to protect himself from the zombie. When his superior yells at him to get away from the container, the idiotic soldier continues to walk towards the undead creature. In situations like this, you wonder why these people bother to join the army and enjoy years of grueling physical training when they can't be bothered to follow orders that are designed to keep them alive. Muchi Christine. In the Stephen King adaptation, a nerdy teenager called Arnold falls in love with a Plymouth Fury called Christine and decides to buy it. When Arnold's car attracts the attention of a girl he fancies, he believes that his luck is finally starting to turn around for the better. Little does he know that his Plymouth Fury is alive and compelled to kill anyone who wrongs her. When Arnold gets picked on by a bully called Muchi, Christine chases after him the same night. When Muchi realizes that Christine isn't messing around and is trying to kill him, he seeks shelter inside an alleyway too narrow for Christine to drive through. However, the vengeful vehicle forces itself in, crushing Muchi to death. Even though Muchi has the most iconic death in the film, he could have easily evaded Christine. If he hopped onto the bonnet of the car, he could have escaped the alleyway. Although it's possible that Christine could have run him over afterwards, it's still silly that Muchi made no effort to get away from this devilish automobile, especially when it was driving towards him at 3 miles an hour. Tom. Scream 3. In the Scream franchise, Sidney Prescott learns that she and her friends are being targeted by a masked murderer called Ghostface. Even though Sidney shot the killer dead, somebody else took on the mantle of Ghostface in Scream 3, causing Sidney to be stalked and tormented once more. To toy with his victims, Ghostface faxes pages of a screenplay which details who he intends to kill next, because this film was made when fax machines were a thing. Curious to learn who's next on the killer's hit list, Sidney's associate Tom ventures into the house where the page was faxed. Because Ghostface cut the power, Tom is forced to read the script with his lighter. To his horror, he reads the words, "And the killer will give mercy to whomever smells the gas." Deducing that Ghostface has turned on all the gas in the house, Tom realizes that he needs to get out, but before he gets the chance, the fire from his lighter ignites the gas, causing the house to explode. Because Ghostface had cut all the power, Tom should have known that he was being led into a trap. If he just took the page out of the house and read it outside, he would have actually been fine. Julius. Friday the 13th, 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Friday the 13th, 8, Jason Takes Manhattan starts with the revived Jason Voorhees sneaking onto a ship that's setting sail for New York. Although the hockey mask-wearing zombie kills several passengers, the survivors believe that they'll be safe when they reach Manhattan. But after docking, Jason continues to hunt them. One of the passengers, a boxer called Julius, foolishly decides to stand up to his pursuer and challenges him to a fight. After pounding on Jason for a minute straight with everything he's got, Julius only manages to stagger the monstrous brute. When Julius finishes his assault, he offers Jason the chance to take a swing at him. With one single uppercut, Jason knocks his head clean off. Now, just to be clear, Jason's punch does not catch Julius off guard. Not only is there a 20-second pause, but Julius asks Jason to hit him after he's demonstrated that he's a superhuman killing machine. After Julius realized that he couldn't defeat his opponent, he should have sprinted away. And that would be pretty easy since Jason seems to be incapable of running. Because of Julius's actions, you could argue that he wasn't even killed by Jason Voorhees, but by his own stupidity. Agent Strom. Saw 5. Throughout the Saw franchise, Jigsaw places people in deadly traps and tells them to do what they need to in order to survive. Because his victims think Jigsaw is deliberately misleading them, they usually don't listen. But there is one simple rule if you find yourself in one of Jigsaw's games. If you follow his instructions to the letter, you will live to see another day. Sadly, Agent Strom learned the hard way what happens when people refuse to listen. In the conclusion of Saw 5, he enters a room that contains a casket filled with broken glass and a tape recorder. By playing the tape, he's informed by the killer that he must enter the box to survive. When Agent Hoffman appears a moment later, Strahm shoves him inside the coffin. To Strahm's horror, he realizes that Jigsaw was telling the truth. When the coffin lid shut, it triggered a mechanism that causes the walls to close in and crush Strahm. This mechanism also causes the coffin to slide out of the room, proving Strahm would have been safe if he just obeyed Jigsaw. Sadly, Strahm's defiance forced him to meet a rather grisly end. The Guard. The Fly 2. In The Fly, Seth Brundle accidentally fused his DNA with a housefly, causing him to gradually turn into a human-insect hybrid. Since he met his end in the film's climax, the sequel focuses on his son Martin, who also harbors the genes of a fly. Believing his DNA could be used to benefit mankind, a group of scientists raise Martin inside a lab. But when his fly DNA activates, he transforms into a monster and begins attacking everyone in the facility. During a fight, Martin's pursuer accidentally turns on an elevator while the creature hurls a guard directly down below the descending lift. Realizing that he's seconds away from being crushed, the guard leaps out of the elevator shaft as quickly as possible. Oh wait, no, he didn't do that. Instead, he just lies there like a moron. This scene would have worked if the guard had broken his leg or something after being knocked into the shaft, but since the guard seems physically fine, there is no explanation why he didn't just get out of the way. His inaction is so nonsensical that you'd assume that the scene was parody if you saw it out of context. Harold, Leprechaun 4 in Space. The original Leprechaun may have not taken itself seriously, but Leprechaun 4 in Space takes the tongue-in-cheek humour to a whole new level. Considering this film has cyborgs, lightsabers, and a scene where the Irish fairy turns into gonorrhea, it's obvious that the story is deliberately over the top. Nevertheless, the characters in this movie are so stupid, you genuinely question whether they have higher brain function. While the Leprechaun performs mischief on a space station, just don't ask how he got there, he's attacked by an assistant called Harold. Furious, the Leprechaun uses telekinesis to hurl a tray at Harold. Even though this tray is paper thin and not particularly sturdy, the impact somehow squashes Harold's poor head like a pancake. However, Harold could have evaded this incredibly stupid death by, just trying to move. Despite the fact that he can see the Leprechaun's projectile coming towards him from a mile away, he makes no effort to duck or jump out of the way. Instead, he just stands there screaming like an idiot, almost like he's inviting the Leprechaun to kill him in the dumbest way imaginable.
Tatum Riley, Scream. Scream as Tatum Riley may catch plenty of flack for her ill-advised attempt to escape Ghostface by crawling through the garage's tiny doggy door, but she very nearly made it out alive. After knocking Ghostface out with the fridge door, she runs to press the button which opens the motorized garage door. But seeing Ghostface start to stumble to his feet, she instead runs back to the main garage area and starts pelting him with beer bottles in a blind panic. Had she held her cool for literally another second and just pressed the button, she would have been able to get the garage door open, then hit Ghostface with bottles and make a clean sprint for the street. Slasher movies obviously wouldn't exist without dubious character decisions, but considering how ably Tatum fought off Ghostface to begin with, it's a shame she got felled by a single moment of non-thought. Detective Stephen Singh, Saw. Detective Stephen Singh was the partner of David Tapp in the original Saw, and very nearly came out of things totally unscathed. After a long night at the office investigating the Jigsaw killer, Singh invites Tapp out for some beers to blow off some steam. Tapp declines to continue his obsessive investigation, but just as Singh is about to leave the office, Tapp calls him back, having figured out the address for Jigsaw's next victim. And so the two pursue the lead to a warehouse, resulting in them saving one of Jigsaw's victims from a gnarly trap. However, in the ensuing chase of Jigsaw himself, Singh triggers a trap which results in his own head being shot to a pulp by 4 shotguns. If Singh had been a little faster moving out the door, he would have been sipping beers at the bar instead of marching to his own death, with Tapp probably visiting the warehouse on his own instead, and admittedly getting himself prematurely killed in the process. Barbara, Night of the Living Dead. They're coming to get you, Barbara. But they sure as hell didn't have to. Despite being a catatonic wreck for much of the movie, Night of the Living Dead's Barbara very nearly survives the night intact, were it not for making one infuriating mistake. After finally snapping out of her traumatized state, she tries to help Ben fend off the impending zombie horde, though ends up frozen in fear when she notices her dead brother Johnny among the undead. Those few seconds of pause allow Johnny to drag her into the zombified mass before Ben retreats into the cellar and waits the zombies out. The next morning, the armed posse arrives and takes care of the remaining ghouls, but of course, they end up mistaking Ben for a zombie and shoot him dead also. Had Barbara reacted just a little quicker and headed down to the cellar with Ben, she clearly would have been the sole survivor. James 1 Shade, Resident Evil. The laser room scene from Paul W.S. Anderson's Resident Evil is easily the best part of the entire, bafflingly successful franchise. When a squad of commandos led by James One Shade attempt to cross the Umbrella Corporation's malevolent AI known as the Red Queen, she deploys a defense mechanism in the hallway leading to her chamber. The Red Queen seals the 4 commandos inside the hallway and fires a series of red-hot lasers across the hall in increasingly perilous succession, making short work of all of the soldiers except for one. Though one puts up an athletic effort to avoid the lasers, the Red Queen finally pulls out her pièce de résistance, a boxed grid of lasers that fill the entire hallway and make it seemingly impossible for anyone to escape. Though Techie Kaplan does manage to hack the laser grid, he's ultimately a few seconds too late to save one's life, as the grid still passes through his body before shutting down, cutting him into meaty chunks. You can certainly argue that one could have survived by simply stepping back a few extra feet. He still had room, but if Kaplan had just been a teensy bit faster on the computer, one would have made it regardless. Liz Hunter, Wolf Creek. Wolf Creek is a nasty, unforgiving little movie that left audiences throwing their hands up in frustration at the near survival of one of the film's main characters, Liz Hunter. Mid-movie, Liz actually has psychopathic murderer Mick Taylor dead to rights, shooting him in the neck with a rifle and very nearly killing him. Liz's mistake, not confirming the damn kill on the spot. Even though Mick makes a point of saying that he only put a single bullet in the rifle, that wouldn't have prevented Liz from using anything in the vicinity to bludgeon Mick and finish him off. Worse still, in a classic case of sudden onset character stupidity, Liz ends up dropping the gun next to Mick, leaving her totally helpless when he gets the drop on her later and grimly finishes her off. If Liz just took care of Mick when he was temporarily incapacitated, she would have totally survived. Laurie Strode, Halloween Resurrection. Oh, Laurie Strode. Halloween Resurrection is the one Halloween sequel unreservedly loathed by basically the entire fanbase, because beyond clumsily retconning Michael Myers' death at the end of Halloween H2O, it dares to kill franchise protagonist Laurie, for a little while anyway. In the film's opening sequence, Laurie is incarcerated in a psychiatric facility where she's preyed upon by Michael, but of course this is all part of Laurie's plan, as she actually has set up a trap to catch and kill Michael once for all. Her trap works, to a point, hoisting Michael up and leaving him defenseless as she prepares to drop him off the roof, until she grabs the idiot ball with both hands, that is. After failing to kill Michael in H2O, and more to the point, accidentally killing an innocent man placed in Michael's costume, she decides she needs to remove Michael's mask and confirm the kill. This moment of hesitation allows Michael to get the upper hand on Laurie, though, stabbing her and dropping her off the roof instead. Laurie, if you just did what needed to be done and didn't hesitate, you would have made it. Thankfully, fans loathed this fate for Laurie, so much so that the 2018 movie blew it out of the continuity airlock, bringing her back to life as a Sarah Connor-esque badass grandma. Everybody in David's car, The Mist. This one really hurts. Frank Darabont's The Mist is a terrific sci-fi horror film in which Earth is invaded by interdimensional Lovecraftian monsters. It's best remembered for its jaw-dropper of an ending in which David enters into a suicide pact with the other remaining survivors after believing they've got no hope of survival. David then shoots the other 4 survivors dead, including his unknowing young son, before turning the gun on himself and realizing he's out of bullets. But as David steps out into the mist to be devoured by the monsters, a tank rolls through the area instead, revealing that the US Army has regained control and is in the process of exterminating the monsters. Basically, had David and company just waited like 90 seconds longer, they all would have survived. Instead, David had to go on living with that knowledge and probably ended up in a psych ward shortly after the events of the movie. Paola, Zombie 2. One of the most legendary scenes in horror movie history is also one of the silliest if you actually break it down. Lucio Fulci's 1979 classic Zombie 2, otherwise known as Zombie Flesh Eaters, boasts the all-timer death scene where Paola gets grabbed by a zombie and forced eyeball first into a massive wooden splinter. The tension and gore are great, as long as you could ignore the fact that Paola actually had a pretty decent opportunity to save her own life by just using her hands to snap the damn splinter off. Sure, she'd still have to fend off the zombie, but her chances were a hell of a lot better without a huge, sharp hunk of wood mere inches from her face, right? You can argue that a character as dumb as Paola lacked the self-preservation to affect her own survival, no matter how many extra seconds you gave her, but those extra few seconds might just have let her survival instincts finally slam into gear. Helen Shivers, I Know What You Did Last Summer. Helen Shivers' death in I Know What You Did Last Summer has left audiences screaming at the screen in frustration for almost 25 years. The surprisingly capable beauty queen very nearly survives her encounter with the hook-wielding fisherman Ben Willis, though makes the mistake of pointlessly indulging her misguided curiosity. During the iconic warehouse chase sequence, just as she's moments away from escaping the alleyway and reaching the safety of the 4th of July street parade, she stops and turns around for a whole 4 seconds before turning back towards the street. Unsurprisingly, Willis has now caught up to her and finishes her off. All Helen had to do was keep moving towards the exit, but instead, curiosity proved to be a killer, as it so often does. For an otherwise resourceful character, this was mighty silly. Meredith Vickers, Prometheus. Ridley Scott's Prometheus doesn't want for stupid characters who died needlessly, as one of the movie's most frustrating deaths is afforded to Wayland mission director Meredith Vickers. At the climax of the movie, protagonist Shaw and Vickers are on the surface of LV-223 when the engineer's spacecraft is disabled in an act of sacrifice by Prometheus's Captain Janik. The engineer's ship crashes back to Earth and begins rolling towards Shaw and Vickers, and though Shaw trips over and rolls to safety, Vickers basically just keeps running in a straight line until she's crushed to death by the horseshoe-shaped ship. Though there's an argument to be made about the sheer panic of trying to run away from an object that's behind you while ascertaining its rolling trajectory, with a few more seconds Vickers probably could have figured that out and, sprinted her way to safety. Given that Shaw made it through the rest of the movie on her own, it's pretty reasonable to expect that Vickers would have made it too, if not for that momentary error of judgment.